The Arch-Warlocks of Clan Skryre are among the most sadistic of the Skaven race. These cruel inventors can be sometimes spotted leading their warp covens among the mechanical rattlings and metal screeches, observing the carnage that their machines bring upon underlings and foes alike. In this video, we will learn to render one of these mechanics in the Grimdark style. I'm Echoes of Vermin, and you are watching the Grimdark Compendium. If you like what we do at the Grimdark Compendium, please feel free to check out our website, grimdarkcompendium.com, which is full of useful and moody courses. Your support means we can keep on creating the grimmest of videos. And now, onto the video. One of the core elements of the Grimdark style is texture variation, and a really cool way to achieve in-scale cloth texture is with a simple paper tissue, soaked in very thin mixture of PVA glue, water, and a tad bit of texture paste. Ideally, you want to peel the tissue, so you are soaking just a single layer of the paper. It isn't really strong enough to form clothing on its own, so it's best used over existing sculpted clothing. Once in place, you can push and pull it around to form folds or flatten it. Edges of the paper can be simply sliced off or teared with a brush. And if need be, you can even add more layers. Since we are working with only a thin, wet layer, it can be pushed in and integrated seamlessly. Cheesecloth can be used similarly, but is much rougher. Here, for example, I think about it as padding layer under the armor. Really cool thing about it is that you can manipulate the individual strings quite easily, putting them where you want them to be. When tackling metals that should be rougher, you can add in-scale texture onto the surface. Here I stipple watered down liquid green stuff, which will create a look of hammered metal. Look how small the texture is, and that's what you want. I want the model to appear even more chaotic with more wires, and that is easily achieved with jewelry bits and copper wires, specifically choosing same diameter as ones already present. Base by itself was pretty busy, so after texture paste and cogs, I covered it with watered PVA glue and used my tile grout mixture, locking it later with PVA glue. This mixture offers high variation of granules, so it's very desirable for basing. Before priming, I also added a small hole for adding raw wiring later. Since no drill was small enough, I used a hot needle. Starting off painting acrylics, I map out the cloak, starting with midtone and blending in white on the lower part, since the cloth would desaturate where it gets most distressed. Darkening the upper part applies the same logic and achieves something of a more interesting look than a flat base coat. Similarly, I like to start Skaven skin with an off-white base coat, Reichland Fleshade from below, and Selective Carabrook Crimson to sketch in skin tones. Choosing a darker metal for iron, copper for conductive parts, and bronze is started with a dark bronze mix with stippled on highlights. Coming back to add skin tonal variation, glazing in a reddish tone blended with pale yellow. Taking advantage of our off-white sketch, I glaze in color onto the tail, highlighting with a reductive technique. First simply using water, and when that does not reactivate the acrylic enough, I come in with isopropyl alcohol and demolish the paint gently. This gives us both desaturation and highlight. Just be careful with the isopropyl alcohol, as it literally eats the paint. My evergreen leather recipe is starting with a brownish base coat and then stippling progressively lighter texture, adding a fleshy color where the leather tube is cut. Later oil and enamel passes will tie the stippling together, so don't be afraid to go brighter. Wood can be much more than just brown. Grey with various tints is a great way to render it. And decay does not need to be exaggerated. A simple green glaze, stronger at the bottom, can be enough. A superstitious, esoteric and insidious take on magic is something that I feel sits right at home for grimdark fantasy. Symbols and writing were historically believed to carry a power of their own, and it makes our robe a little more special. With acrylics being laid out and having a sketch, a layer of Goon's Grime will serve us as a unifying wash, laying grounds for steps with oils and other enamels. This is my first time using it through an airbrush actually, and I have to say I love how smooth a layer that creates. Just be sure to wear a mask and ventilate properly. And, as you are probably expecting, after unifying wash comes the reductive pass. Reactivating the enamel layer with mineral spirit, gently touching we remove it, and you can see me leaving just enough there, using a dry end of my tool to blend and push it around towards recesses. You can do reductive pass several times, and you probably should. Take your time, control the enamel. And where the Q-tip is too big, you can grab a brush. Since oils and some of the villainy inks are semi-transparent by nature, they are perfect for rendering layered skin with various tones. After reducing a lot of the Goon's Grime on the skin, I tint it with a Dystopian brown, removing it with a dry tool to leave most on. Building onto that with Dead Flesh oil paint with just a light pass, I feather the oil with a dry brush. The enamel and oil layer will blend, creating a transition and letting us blend more tones with oils and enamels, such as distressed red on the knuckles. If you haven't ever used oils before, try it. Might be daunting at first, but they are in their essence very forgiving, as you can remove and blend them for a very long time. Oils can also be great for desaturating colors that you already have on, or for subtle color variation. Here you can see me first getting some decay effects onto the parts of the cloaks to have these greyish desaturated patches that will now blend with the dead flesh I'm stippling. I'm gonna be a little chaotic now and jumping back and forth between parts of the mini, being possessed by the spirit of Carlos Bilis. Wanting to add a bit more dimension and surface variation to the armor, I blackened the recesses with oil, scrubbing it to smoothness. I immediately jump dimensions and also add metallic highlights with silver. Pitted metal surface doesn't really work that way in reality, but I'm adding the highlights for visual interest and stylization, both equally important as grounded realistic elements. You just need to strike a balance that feels right to you. In my mind, Skaven should have a very dingy equipment, and this one especially strikes me as someone paranoid enough not to take their metallic suit off very often, or letting someone else clean it. Because of that, I'm not afraid to render heavy oxidization. I'll be using Villainy Ink Sector Rust and Max Machina as dark and light rust, applying them mostly around recesses and blending them. They alone add both color and texture of rust, but I also used orange oil paint for both streaks and light oxidized discoloration of the metal. In reverse, meaning first oil and then enamel, I also render oxidization on the bronze, getting a pale blue oxide quite selectively and removing some. Not wanting to build up too much, since Decay of Death I will be using later will add a lot of texture by itself. With its more greenish tone, it will also effortlessly blend into the oil underneath it, finishing our bronze oxide. After drying a bit, I reactivate it and manipulate it further, trying to get rid of weird patterns, creating streaks, and for it all to look as natural as I can make it. I still feel there isn't enough black variation on the iron. I was pondering on what to use, and I've been looking forward to trying Decrepit Filth from Phase 2, which should be getting shipped as we speak to those who pre-ordered the tester kits. I use it here to darken lower parts of the iron, and once it dries on my palette, I stipple it in chunks like a build-up, well, filth. And that's the armor taken care of, so I go back to the robe, adding dots of industrial earth on the thin layer of that flesh. Feathering it will give us slight discoloration on the robe. It even gets too much at one point, but that is no issue with oils. I stipple and blend more that flesh, going back and forth a few times, making sure the runes stay visible. If you apply too much oil, just remove it with mineral spirits and start again. Once I'm happy with it, I even add more industrial earth under the armor and to recesses of the folds, adding more contrast. Since we have active oils all around, it is very easy to blend for shading. It's desirable to reinforce recesses with acrylic washes as one of the last steps, adding definition and neatening up our paint job. Important step is to make sure surface finish variation is correct. Wooden cloth here should be matte, skin satin, and so on. Oils often dry satin, which is good for skin, but not so much for cloth, so we have to remedy that with varnishes. This is at the core of the Grimdark style, and is very important to control. Now to my mistress, my drug, the fur technique. Starting with a drop of glue, you pluck a bit of fur from a pelt and glue it at the angle you want. Continuing this bit by bit, bottom to top, we apply it on sculpted fur, cutting it to shape and brushing off loose hair. Then, for round 2, we sprinkle the fur with water and brush it into final shape. And finally, as a last step, we tint the fur with inks or washes airbrushed. Normally I would go back and fix bald spots like these, or make them pus-filled scabs, but this won't be visible with the arm in place, so I don't worry about it. Wires and such can be added even after paint. Always make sure they are the correct scale though. For example, this is a very thin 0.15 wire twisted together for very small wiring. I glue it into place and tint it to finish in several thin layers of Goon's Grime, continuing with oxidization with oils. You don't have to be afraid to add some stark OSL into your Grimdark painting. as that can serve as a nice contrast. My favorite way to paint warpstone is blocking out the light sources with white and airbrushing green fluo paint, simulating the light itself since the paint is semi-transparent. I also use the fluo green for little leakages from the pipes, so they feel unstable. The warpstone itself gets a thoughtful wash with green ink afterwards for some shading. For physical weathering, you do not need to use just a brush, but also a technique called soft pressing, using different tools like metal brush for random patterns, or a needle like this for creating deliberate physical scratches on materials, like armor damage, cloth wear and tear, or cracked leather. It adds physical dimension to the material instead of just painting on the effects. Just be sure to have a light hand so you push only into the paint layers and not into the plastic itself. Always remember to clean the area with a soft brush though, so there is no residue left. For basic tabletop standard, this is where I would leave the OSL, but I'm gonna push it a bit more. As the light would travel, it would reflect most on the edges of materials, and that is why I edge highlight everywhere the light lands, starting off with just thin fluo green and adding more white and covering more as I highlight nearer the light source. So you will have brightest and sort of longest edge highlights nearest to the source. Painting the lens light, I overdid it a little bit with the white ink, but it was not beyond the point of no return, so I pushed on with a few thin layers of fluo green. I've talked about highlights, but shadows are equally as important for OSL, so with Coley a green shade, I washed the recesses of the mask, creating small shadows in between the lens and the metal. Same highlighting philosophy as before applies here, tracing along the edges brighter near the source and right below the lens. Since the lens would also reflect very brightly right in front, I stipple on some pure white ink. I build the highlights slowly more and more, coming back with thin, pure fluo green to tie the highlights together in like a light glaze. The lens itself gets a stipple of thin green ink and a little white dot to look more like a lens and for some color variation. As the last step, I finish a quick base scheme with a few pigment powders, putting some on the Skaven's feet and robe to time him into the base environment. Now, the Arch-Warlock is ready to lead an event for his coven. With all this, you can try creating your own Grimdark Skaven to your vision, or you can of course use these techniques on anything else entirely. Keep in mind the use of oils and surface finish variation, as those can really enhance your minis and bring them to new heights. So, this has been Echoes of Vermin, and I thank you for watching. Take care.